So, Reset. Nice big
Yes.
book with a target on it. Oh, Roseanne, my goodness, popular book. All right, I will keep letting people in. If I look like I'm suddenly having a brain fart moment, it's because I'm letting somebody in. I'm multitasking. So let's start the same way we always start, which is general thoughts about reactions to the book, other than great book. Anything in particular kind of jump out at people?
Martha, you're on mute.
I just full disclosure, I'll be the silent person in this. I bought the book. It's sitting in my library and I haven't started it. But I thought it would be really interesting, since it's nonfiction, to hear what people, it's not like there's a spoiler alert. I can hear what people have to say, and then I plan to read it next week. So I will just be I'll be the listener.
Nope, that is absolutely fine. You're certainly not the first to do that.
Megan, I guess I'll jump in. Like you said,
Sure.
it was a great book, but the more about it is that I love how he broke it into finding the leverage point and then restacking resources and the 5 steps and the 6 steps, and with all the stories really bring it to life, because just when you read the chapter titles and stuff like that, okay, but you can interpret it in many different ways. But I loved how he had so many great stories with the very specific steps for you to understand. Oh, and then I saw a lot of items, a lot of steps that I can apply with my team, within my organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to just, oh, I'm sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
go ahead, Gloria.
Well, I just wanted to comment that, we lead transformation at the American Medical Association, and, we lead with a 4C strategy: culture, capabilities, collaboration, and celebration. And so this book was so affirming to us, because we've been leading with that 4C strategy to try to evolve based on best practices. So it was affirming. We also had a presentation to create. So it really gave us the confidence and gave us some sort of cues and clues of how we could talk about things in a more impactful way. You know how you do your job every day and it just feels like it's the job and it's not that glitzy or interesting. It's just sometimes almost a slog. But this really, Jeff, I know, is on, and Sarah on my team, it really made us realize that we were on to something. And I was particularly on culture, which is something we really focus on a lot. Disempowerment, I never really thought about it. We think of empowerment, which I don't love the word, but I really like the word disempowerment, because we know what that means. It's the stop sign. So I'll stop talking here, but the book really resonated for all of us on our team, and as you know, Megan, because we've talked about that, I was so excited. I got pages and pages of notes. So yeah. Watch out, Jeff and Sarah. Lots
I'm
to do.
sorry, Jeff and
yeah.
Sarah. Yeah, no, I mean, we've read a couple other Heath Brothers books, including their very first ones, Made to Stick, which is about how to make ideas sticky and memorable. And one thing you can say about both Chip and Dan is they practice what they preach, because stories is one of the things in the model from that book, and they do all of that. So I don't even have to worry when I pick up a book by them whether or not it's going to be a good and an engaging read. And then usually the content, this one in particular, I felt like it was really timely, because as we hit this kind of tsunami of uncertainty, I feel like it's even harder. What I'm hearing from people is it's even harder to get any sort of initiative or keep support for any sort of initiative, because everybody's like, yeah, we don't want to start anything big. So just the idea that you don't need a giant initiative to make a big change felt like it was a really useful thing to remind people of, particularly in customer experience. I don't know if anybody else picked up on that.
Yeah, I just want to say I was inspired by the scrappiness of the solutions, that you don't necessarily need a big change effort. Sometimes it's those small targeted things that you can measure and experiment with. And so it kind of reminds me of Google's roof shots instead of moon shots. Like we have this big goal. What are the things we can do now that are going to make an impact and collectively, kind of get away from that death by 1,000 cuts?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. So we've had this conversation with ourselves about letting small and big wins bubble up, and don't ignore the small wins, because they actually either build synergistically to a big win, or they surprise you, because it's sometimes the smaller wins that are best easily told. Short story. We started this,
Yeah.
it was this, we ended with this, and here's the business growth. And some of those are so much easier to understand by our senior leadership that they think it's a big deal. Meanwhile, we're, engineering a whole building, would you say, and it's hard to tell that story. It's when the outcome happens, right? Because you have to go in the beginning. It's like, the book of Revolution or something. So, or whatever that is. So,
that's a really good point, Gloria. That, small things are easier to explain and you can communicate them more frequently, giving people this feeling of progress. When I saw that in the book, that was one of the things that really stuck out at me. Was I know the theory that people need to feel like they're making progress, and if they don't feel like they're making progress, then they get feeling disempowered or like it's not helping. And that's, again, something I think we've struggled with in CX, because a lot of what we're tackling is so big. And so this idea that we can find, small things that we can move, feels like it would be good for kind of our own psyche as a group, in addition to for business. I want to, the first question on the discussion guide sheet, not that I expect anybody to have read that, it was mostly for me. One of the other things I loved about this book is the reemergence of bright spots. So the concept of bright spots was first introduced, Chip and Dan first introduced that in their book Switch, How to Change When Change is Hard. And the idea was, instead of focusing on what's not working, what if you went and looked at all the things that were working and all the places it was working, and say, why does it work there? And how can we get it to be more of that? I've always loved that approach. I actually had the honor of getting to sit in a bright spot analysis workshop that Chip led. And I felt like that coming back in this book was kind of a reminder that maybe we need to check our, I don't want to say check our own reality, but we get so sucked into the negativity bias, and so does the whole world. When Roxy and I did the first version of the customer experience index, the first time we asked, how did this experience make you feel, when we added the emotion question, we expected to get, maybe 50-50. 75% of transactions made people feel positive. Only 25% even made people feel negative. We were kind of like, oh, maybe we don't all suck as bad as we thought we did, So I'd love to talk a little bit about how you think, not just leverage points, but bright spot leverage points. If you think about your organization or your work from that mindset, how does that get, what do you think differently about when you kind of reframe it like that? Current work or work you've done in previous organizations?
So recently, we measure, of course, our client satisfaction. And the executives have been focusing on the lower scores and the problems and stuff like that. Last wave, they brought me in to do some analysis on actually the promoters. And of course, some people are cynical about it, like, oh, why don't they want to hear about the bad news? And like, well, they've heard enough about that, right? So they focused on that. Let's see what's happening with the promoters and see what are some of those success stories that we can learn and see if we can replicate them. So that's an example from the organization. As a smaller example, I, within my team, had a lot of people challenged with some of the newer processes and different groups that we're working with. But there was this one person who was doing really well. Like she was completely utilizing these other teams and creating her own quick processes. I said, you know what? I want you to come and discuss with our team, to tell our team your best practices. Like, how are you doing this process? Hoping that others can learn from her and start replicating. But you're right. I mean, most of the time we all focus on the negatives and problem solving. What's wrong here?
Yeah. And I think that's particularly true. So in my experience, when an organization comes to CX, they're usually coming at it from the perspective of, if we don't do something, we're going to go out of business, or things are good, but we think we can do better. And it's actually harder to sell a CX program in the things are good, we think we can do better area. And so bright spots is kind of essential to making that kind of an innovation case. Be like, did you know that when this happens, the results are this X? And right now one team is doing that because it was their idea, but what if everybody? And people are like, oh, okay, I can do that.
Well, Megan, we had this. It's a little bit different than we've done bright spot analysis, particularly for sales in the contact center. We've got one person who, like, her sales are literally we elevate her goal every year and she always beats it by, 200%. So we thought, oh, we need to monitor. We could never really, so that bright spot analysis, we could never really figure it out. She was doing all the same things other people are doing. So I think she may have a gift. So we kind of failed there because we tried and tried, but then, we walked away from that and the idea of bright spot occurred to us. We had sort of I hope this doesn't offend anybody, come to Jesus meeting with one of our stakeholders who pulled me aside, said, a VP who said, Gloria, I've been working with you for a long time and I love these stakeholder meetings we're having, but you are bringing my staff down. You're coming in with all this power and all this data and they're working their hearts out. And all you ever do is bring up what we need to fix. And it really took Jeff and I back, like, yeah, how must that feel thinking outside in from the stakeholder as the customer? So we started a positive VOC program. So we've got plenty of things to fix, but we started really leveraging our speech analytics and other tools to try to purposively start those meetings with something that's going well. And it turned around the tenor of the meeting. They were not as resistant, and our relationship with this VP became much, much easier. So it really sometimes this bright spot thought can be kind of, I feel like, experimented with. It doesn't have to be the method that we expect. It's just sort of bringing to bear the importance of reinforcing human beings for doing something right. Even though they might be doing a lot of things, we together as an organization may be doing a lot of things wrong, but really helping people feel good about themselves, psych safety and all that stuff. So that has been a game changer, I think, for us.
I love that, Gloria. And I think what you did, one of the concepts I loved in the book was this concept of tappable motivation. Do you guys remember this concept? That you kind of work with the energy for what people are excited to do. And there is energy. Somebody somewhere is excited to do something, even if it's not what they're doing. So you kind of helped increase their tappable motivation in addition to, kind of finding it and figuring out where it is. What do you think, and this is a royal you, everybody, just based on your experience, what do you think are some of the things that people are most naturally drawn to? Like if I pitch doing this, they're going to be like, yeah, let's do it. If I say this, they're less excited to do it. Are there any patterns to that?
I think it's, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I think I'm remembering from the book, but like a leverage point and something where it's like not a crazy amount of work, but will have like a big impact. So probably something of that nature. I was also going to say, like, people want to work on, like, or maybe this is just me, but like an innovation and something that will have like a broader impact. So I guess that maybe fits the bill of the leverage point as well. But yeah, just
Yeah, so there's more tappable motivation to do something that feels meaningful beyond just making the company more money. And who else? We had somebody else who was going to go.
Oh yeah, this is Christine. Sorry, I'm not.
Oh, hey.
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not camera ready just yet because I'm finishing
Okay.
with my dog stuff. But I was just going to say, I was reminded when I was at Charles Schwab and we were going through our cost cutting thing, and I was in marketing at the time, and they had hired Bain across the company to work with different teams to see how to, how to save money. And they were looking, what was different about it is they were looking for employees within the organization. So it wasn't just the typical consultants coming in and saying, okay, you need to cut this, you need to cut this. They were smart enough to look for people within different organizations and have them go out in, and it was really recognizing different people's expertise. And so I had been at Schwab for 8 years. I was looking for a little change within marketing communications, and I raised my hand and I got chosen. Different people got chosen in different operations, call center, all different areas to see how we could cut costs. And the way I approached it was like, oh, great. I get to do this in a customer experience friendly way. Like not like that's my ideal is when we can save money, increase efficiency, and improve the customer experience. And so that felt good. That was like a year-long project working in strategy that year. And so I think that to answer your question, I think that's like it was a motivation like, oh, I'm really interested. I don't want to leave, but I'm looking for a change. But like leveraging my expertise and getting to work with the Bain team on a weekly basis when I had to go report what I found and ideating and brainstorming with them was like, it was a really great experience. And so
Yeah, and I think you make such a great point, which is we tend to have more inherent motivation for new things than we do for things we've been doing for a while, even if the things we've been doing for a while are really important. The fact that we've been doing it for a while is like, oh, okay, I got to keep doing this. So I think that's a great point. Just even taking things that you've been doing and making them feel new. In it, if you can't actually go on to doing something new.
But it was
I love
also,
that.
sorry, just to add to, I mean, the nuance I think that was relevant is that for years in marketing communications, we were sending out, if you had, most of the customers averaged 7 different accounts. They had an IRA, a bank account, all these different accounts. Every time someone would apply for a 529 account, let's say they had 2 kids, they had to fill out 2 separate applications with their name, their address, even if they've already been a Schwab customer for 10 years and we knew their address. Like, why are you asking for your address again? And you're so secure. Like it was dumb. And we were trying to change that for a while, but because the cost cutting thing with the company came up, it was like, oh, and PS, did you know that we're spending X millions of dollars sending out 2 glossy brochures and sending out 2 applications and 2 mailings and then having people like, so that was sort of the nuance there of something we were trying to do for a while, but because of this other corporate initiative, we were able to kind of get that in.
That's fascinating.
But I think you also brought up an interesting point that I always see, which is the collaboration, like getting to collaborate with an outside company. Like you got to collaborate with Bain and it's just new people. And I think people are intrinsically drawn to that kind of social, we're going to work together, we're going to roll up our sleeves and just do something with different people where we're all talking and engaging on it.
Yes, 100%.
And I think that to build on that, I think people are naturally drawn to a sense of play as well. And so that's where sometimes gamification, it goes in that direction, but just that sense of fluidity with the environment and it's engaging in a way that doesn't feel like it's draining your energy, but building on your energy.
Yeah, and I'll say just for me personally, I forgot how much I love doing research until I started doing research again. I've been
Mm.
doing, kind of, talking to people, but I haven't done a formal research project really since I left Forrester almost 9 years ago. And I started one about 2 months ago. And I've literally been texting my friends that I used to work with there and going, oh my God, I forgot how much fun this is. Like I get off an hour-long interview call where I have done almost none of the talking. And I'm just like, I have a grin from ear to ear. And I'm like, I forgot how much fun this is. So now it's motivating to me to do more of it. Which weirdly I couldn't motivate myself to do before. But
I wanted to just talk about the core. I think it was Chris who was talking about Bain or the change, the reengineering. Was that you, Christine?
it
Yeah,
was
I thought.
Christine. Yeah.
Yeah, I've done a lot of reengineering at the AMA, starting from the old days of kind of, slash and burn but I love it when you have the kind of senior leadership lens that enables you to involve people in the change because you're not left with the embers that you have to rekindle, maybe break and rekindle. You left with some seeds of hope and some built-in change leaders. And it's the same way, about our talking about hiring people, even though we might think we know who we want, getting other people's feedback on our team, making sure that they feel involved and they feel like they had a say, or at least they had an inside view of what was happening around our environment. So just the whole idea of change theory, we get so businessy that we forget that there's a whole discipline out there of change theory that can really support what we're doing if we just kind of stop pedaling for a moment. We all know it. It's just trying to remember to invoke those best practices that are known to be effective.
I love how you said that, like built-in change makers, because it was very progressive. I mean, we've probably all been at places where the proverbial consultants come in and they're meeting in a room over here, and then they come, at some point, and you're not included in the meetings always. And then it comes down to a department or a team, and it's like, here's what we found. And maybe they interviewed some people along the way, of course, but it's mostly a lot of like, it seems like to some people back end or high, like executive level conversations, and then it comes down and says, okay, here's what we found, and you need to do it's like, and like you said, I'm glad you brought up the change theory. It's like, yeah, you don't have that buy-in of people. You're just kind of telling them. And then I've been at organizations where they're rolling their eyes and they're like, oh, McKinsey came up with that, did they? Well, what do they know? And oh,
Yeah.
it's like Accenture came up with that, and da 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 da, and then people are resistant. So I thank you for making that connection with change theory. That's
Yeah. And Martha, I'd be curious to hear your experiences with this and anyone else who's been on the consulting side of that table. That kind of setup doesn't feel any better to us usually than it does. Like
Yeah.
we'd love to get the rest of the organization involved. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that.
I think what I'll just say to that is, so I'm working with an organization that's going through a lot of change. And what I see is this balance for the leadership team, between wanting to be involved in everything and knowing they don't have the time. And so there's this balance of how to get their input and their thoughts and their buy-in in this small, tiny bit of time as possible. And that it's been an interesting challenge, because to the point of they always go to the bad stuff, and we got through our forecasting process, and everybody's like, well, it's a mess. I'm like, yeah, but it's less of a mess than it was 3 months ago. So let's take a little bit of something out of that and recognize that we're making some progress and it's not all bad. But in general, though, if anybody has thoughts on like, how do you, I find that I often end up kind of packaging things up, or having a conversation, packaging it up and saying, I think this is what you said. Did I miss anything? Rather than asking them to try to produce something on top of everything else they're all trying to do.
Stephanie, what you're talking about reminds me of the concept of alignment and autonomy that he covered in chapter 10, when he was talking about, for alignment, the leadership needs to provide that clear direction, clear end goal. So like to your point, leadership wants to be involved. Well, leadership needs to define what needs to happen at the end. But then they probably don't have to be involved in getting it done and let the teams take the autonomy. And that way, they can drive it. And that way, they can also feel the sense of accomplishment, sense of inclusion, more buy-in.
Yeah, it's been an interesting, it was really interesting reading this book while I'm working with this organization, because they are struggling a lot with that. The leadership team is all working 60-hour weeks and, can barely take a moment to breathe themselves, let alone hand it off to their team. And, in some cases it's because there isn't a team to hand it off to, or there's a missing, there's somebody who's left. And, my goal has just been to help them find a little clarity and calm in that chaos. And as much as anything, I'm working with the CEO, trying to help her not push when pushing is just going to create more friction and suck the energy dry even more than it already is. So yeah.
Sounds like they need to identify where the waste is and then restock the resources so that they have the team to delegate it to.
It's not, well, yeah, I don't know that there's a lot of waste in the system. It's more of a lack of prioritization and a new parent company who's come in and asked for different things, and they're all still reacting.
So I'm going to push back on that a little bit, Stephanie and Funda. I was thinking the same thing you were thinking. I'm like, oh, that sounds like the CEO needs to restack some of her own resources. Not, lack of priorities. How is that not waste?
Oh, I don't disagree, but I think the challenge has been some of it, they were acquired about a year ago, and some of it has been the difference in expectations between the old parent and the new parents. And so to some degree, the new parents just asking them to do more and more and more and more and more, and there's no more. They're pretty, at least from a revenue per head kind of perspective, they're pretty lean. So it's been an interesting challenge to help them articulate that and help get the right kinds of decisions in people so they can, in front of people, so they can make them. We're getting right. I've been working a lot with finance. They've had some particular challenges there. And so I already waved the yellow flag and said, you may want to forecast on July 22nd, but you can either have July 22nd with this, or you can have it after that. Yeah, now they can make the decision. So it, like, getting ahead of those things and really making them, aware of where the pressure points are has been an interesting challenge. But the book was like, I have to say, there were things I'm like, I wish I could get the whole leadership team to read this right now, because they need so much to like take that step back and rethink where they are and realize it's changed and be like, just accept some of the chaos and figure out if they even want to be there at some level, right? And how they can be there.
Yeah. And something you just said reminded me, there was a chapter on finding the goal of the goal. Like, why are we, not just what are we trying to do, but why are we trying to do that? And is there a different way to achieve it? One of the things that popped into my head as I was reading it was that I very often see people say, well, the constraint is this, when in reality, the constraint is something else. You think the constraint is this, but that constraint exists because somebody else believes this other thing is a constraint or a rule, or we can't do it that way, or we didn't do it that way. So just kind of rethinking, the question number 2 on the list, Roxy Strominger, who some of you know, and Tabitha Dunn, who I think a lot of you also know, other CX leaders. We had a long conversation at the CXPA conference last year about the need to stop complaining about not having enough budget or resources, because none of us have ever met anyone in the history of anything that thought they had enough budget or resources. And so, do you have enough to do everything you wanted to do? No. Do you have enough to do something? Yes. So that was one of the questions I had posed, was just thinking about, the idea of eliminating waste and restacking resources, I think is a great way to think about that. But also just the idea that, what if we kind of back away from the fact that it's enough to do something? What if we stop seeing it as a constraint and just a truth?
Mm.
It's like going to the person who's asking for something and helping them understand why it is hard, and maybe taking a moment and saying, would this 60 or 80% answer be good enough to get us what we need, or do we really need to do the 100%? And that's, there's a lot of waste in that 20 to 40% that we didn't really need to do. That would be.
It's kind of like the old adage, for those of you who have been also in the service industry, this whole concept of outside in really helped us realize that delight might not necessarily be, it might be a great thing to do, but it doesn't trump the absence of consistent, doesn't make up for consistent meeting of needs, right? So it really forced us to pivot from all our hoops and bells and say, what if we looked at the basics and we made sure everyone was a top performer in basics? That's like a new thought. Like, we don't want a bell curve there. We want the bell curve somewhere else, but that's like table stakes. And that was resource changing because we weren't chasing. It costs a lot of money for us to chase that. But what we found is when we brought everybody up to that level, it wasn't hard for them to do the rest. It was almost kinetic, not everyone, but we had a higher percentage of people who were really able to do the sort of delight, exceed, superstars. And then less friction, less complaints, fewer escalations, fewer low value contacts, so we could actually use those resources, which is what funded our early CX work. So I would say having the courage to redirect and think about how you want to really use your resources and use that as a building block.
And that sounds like a great example of the burst strategy. Do you guys remember the burst strategy, where he says, just rather than trying to make progress on 8 things, just take a concentrated amount of time and plow through something and just use that burst to get something done, and then you can stop worrying about that. That sounds to me like it was kind of a burst approach.
And
Yeah, we
later,
didn't know it. We didn't have vernacular for it, but now we do. We'll
Yeah.
check that off our list.
and then in a lot of cases, it builds momentum, and there's continuous, like other bursts and continuous keep going.
Yeah.
I once walked into an organization I was working at, and of course the executives have been talking. The different department was the digital group, and we had 3 different floors. And when you walked into the floors, it was like a big, huge A-frame, and it said, if it's not on the list, sorry for my dog, if it's not on the list, it doesn't exist. And it was the list of the top like 7 or 8 programs. And it's, it was like, if you're not working on one of these programs, don't go talk to your manager. And it was done in a polite way. It wasn't like you're doing something wrong, or we're not going to ever do this again, but it was explained. And so that just stuck with me. Like, if it was a visual thing, it wasn't just an email that was sent out. It wasn't just a all hands meeting. It was a, if it's not, and here this is like 20 years later. And I remember that executive who did that. It was the CTO at the time, was like, it's not on the list. It doesn't exist. But he led it like with.
Well, and it takes a lot of discipline to do that. I did one of my, I don't know if some of you follow my Word Nerd Wednesday series that I do on LinkedIn, but I'm a huge word nerd. So I'll do everything from like, did you know this word comes from the French for whatever, to like, hey, have we ever really thought about what management means? And one of them was the word priority. And it turns out that the word priority did not have a plural for most of its existence, because priority means the thing that comes before, and only one thing can come before. And so we sort of, as a society, at some point, I think it was in the 1700s, might have been a little earlier than that, started deciding that we could have more than one priority, but that word didn't even have a plural for several hundred years. I know.
That's interesting. It's almost like society couldn't handle just one. It's like, all right, now let's just add on to it.
We can't make decisions. That's all what that means.
We're scared. We're
Hard to
scared.
say no.
People are scared to make decisions, and more so now than ever. So yeah, it is, and that's I think that gets to the alignment. I think Funda, you were talking about, and it also gets to the consistency that Gloria was talking about, because it's not just consistency in, you know, what you're doing, it's consistency in what you're focusing on doing or planning to do for the future. How many people have ever been on something where it's the absolute top priority and then it doesn't exist the next year? Yep.
It kind of
I've
goes
done
along.
it to my own team. You know, it's easy to do.
I think that one of the things is, how do we message that? Because sometimes things do change, right? I mean, I don't know, something happened like April 1st this year, and it kind of threw a whole bunch of stuff up in the air. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that things change. And to help the conversation move forward. Is like, you may be focused on growth, but wow, you start to see your early life cycle customer retention start to go down. Well, now we need to really shift and focus on that, because we can grow and add new customers all we want, but if we don't deal with that issue, it doesn't matter. We're just getting less and less efficient with our marketing. So some of that is just, how do we talk about it? How do we tell the story around why the change is happening?
Well, I love that, Stephanie. And you just made me think of one of my favorite quotes from the whole book, which is on page 10, which I highlighted, which is, what looks like mismanagement is often the accidental accretion of outdated habits. So it's not necessarily conscious mismanagement. It's that we never stop to say, what have we been doing that we don't need to do anymore, right? We don't have that waste elimination.
Could you read that quote again? Could you read that again? That was really.
What looks like mismanagement is often the accidental accretion of outdated habits.
Huh? Yeah.
I have a good personal example that many of us have probably experienced. As a parent, your child can do new things again and again and again, like every few weeks or months or days or whatever it is. And there are times when you will catch yourself doing something for them that you always used to do, but they can now handle themselves, and you don't even think about it.
Yeah.
What a waste. Go make your own lunch.
Yeah. Stephanie, I love that you made that pivot, because that was kind of where I wanted to go. Was, you know, we've talked about how our organizations can restack resources. This book had a profound impact on me personally, thinking about how I work, because the good and bad of being a solopreneur and working for yourself is nobody tells you what your priorities should be, right? You're the one that has to do that and have that self-evaluation. So I'm curious if people thought at all, as you were doing this, either professionally or personally, you know, are there leverage points in your life, in your work, in your team, things that you said, or sort of said, oh, you know what, that is waste. I don't need to do that anymore.
One of the things I loved in the book was when he talked about swapping out the word messiness for richness. I've been trying to adopt that mentality, because in life as a parent, things feel messy like all the time. And so I felt really proud of myself recently, where we had some kitchen cabinets that were getting loose. And I was like, I'm gonna fix those cabinets. And it felt really good just to like get something done and feel like there's one less mess, or the world got richer.
Yeah.
Less messy.
I also, I think that we have to plan to restack the deck. Like, I think that dawned on me some time ago during our strategic planning. We always have thank you for telling us it's normal, Megan. I think in one of your posts, by, the end of Q1, we usually have our strat plan done and all of our, performance contracts then lined up. But we always knew that there would be some need that would bubble up or opportunity. We usually call them opportunities that we just we can't ignore. So we started really reprioritizing what we think are the priorities and leaving sort of a safe space for unanticipated projects. And I was worried that that would kind of turn the burner down for our team and people would be less motivated. And really, it gave us that breathing room. And there's never been a time that we haven't filled that space. But now it feels planned and it doesn't feel, well, maybe to me, I don't know, maybe Jeff and Sarah would be able to better say this, but it doesn't feel like a burden anymore because we planned for the unplanned. And that's a way kind of we just plan to restack the deck, and we might have to make that a higher priority than our previous priorities. We don't know. It depends on the business impact. But that was the only survival mode for people not feeling resentful that we've done all this planning and yet there's still more.
Yeah,
go
ahead.
No, that's good.
One of the pieces of advice I often give people is I can guarantee you with 100% certainty that when you track metrics on your dashboard, one of three things will happen. The number will be over what you wanted, under what you wanted, or exactly what you wanted. You do not need to wait to think through what you would do in each of those scenarios until you get the number. Like maybe sitting down and saying, what are we going to do if this number comes in lower than we think? I know we don't want to think about it, but rather than everybody going, it's your fault, you figure it out. What if we had a plan before that emotion was in place to say, so, restacking the resources that are used for the scramble to do them earlier and say, okay, you know what, came in lower than we thought. We agreed these folks are going to go investigate that, go do. And you're not wasting the emotional energy. Because that's a whole other level of waste we haven't even talked about.
Stephanie also said timing of measurement. So being courageous enough, and if you have the control to say, look, it's only 1/4 of AI. We wanted to have an impact in 3 months. Okay, let's come back. Let's continue to monitor, but let's come back and give this tool or our process time to deliver. Let's don't just start scrambling and changing things before we really know what's going on. I think that Stephanie, having the courage to say the measurement period, even though it might be the fiscal measurement period, it may not be the process measurement cycle.
Yeah. Michael, Deb, Suzanne, you guys have been quiet. I don't force people to talk, but I do like to make sure there is space for everyone to talk if they want to. So if there's anything that any of you would like to weigh in on, I don't want you to think we're ignoring you.
No, it's fascinating just to hear the stories, right? It shows up everywhere. I mean, personal, professional, it's almost the underlying joke that we know all this stuff. And it's just, you have to read the book to kind of remind you and ground you again. I'm like, why do we stray from? I mean, I love your example of the word priority. The world can't accept the fact that we have to make a priority, period, right? But it also goes to the complexity. I guess the only counterpoint to it also shows how complex our world is. Perhaps in the 1700s, our world wasn't that complex, where a priority was just a priority and we were done with it. Well, so how do we manage all these different interdependencies that now we're challenged on? How do we continuously evolve? So, I guess you could look at it for both ways, but it is interesting and challenging at the same time. So yeah, I'm just trying to soak it in a little bit and trying to think about how I can internalize it as well.
Yeah, I find myself in a very similar state that there's so many of these concepts are like, like downtime. Yeah, learned about that how many decades ago. And yet, but I don't put it into practice. And I'm in a totally different environment now, working at a church, but a growing staff. And I came up with an example. I've got an employee who I hired to do this. They're doing that. I want them to do some of this, but they're actually better at that. So, this is reminding me, the book is reminding me that I really need to release them into their sweet spot and their skills and their talents and figure out how I get the other stuff done without dragging them down. So there's just example, there's so many examples of opportunities to apply it.
I
I
want to
think we
go to
all-
your church.
Well, and I think to Deb's point, I think if we can, or someone said it earlier, if we could all read the book simultaneously and do the reset at the same time, that would be amazing, right?
Yeah.
What's to say we can't?
That's a good question.
I don't
You
know.
know, as-
When I was at an organization, the leader, the CMO, had all of the team read, and it was not just her direct reports, but it was an invitation for everybody to read it, and they got everybody the book. So there was an encouragement. You can do that.
Yeah.
We could do that.
That is an author business model. That is actually the ideal author business model, is that
Yeah.
you can write a book for the leader, or you can write a book for the leader to buy for their team.
Ooh.
So, and that's it, as an author, when you're thinking about what to write your book about, that's kind of big in the speaker world. But also, yes, you can get everybody to read it together. I was also thinking that just like we do this virtual book club, for some reason we don't reset except like the first week of January. And why can we not do that also in the first week of April and whatever the first month of the remaining quarter is? We at home, my fiance and I both have really bad allergies. So we actually, at the beginning of every quarter, doesn't matter if the light comes on saying, check your filters, we change the filters in all the air purifiers, because we're like, we don't want to wait for it to get so bad that we're starting to go, why can't either one of us breathe? So, and he's actually gotten me into doing it. That's a habit that he had that he's gotten me into doing, is just sort of having a time be the trigger where you just do this and say, okay, wait a minute, let me take a step back. So that's something, we could think about, doing some sort of a reset workshop later in the year. I'll put it
Love
on
that
my
idea.
list.
Love that idea.
I will put it on my list. Lots of things to happen.
Well, I think it's
later
just
this
really
year.
timely. This book is timely given the budget cuts. I'm working inside with a bank right now, and it's just exactly what you said. They just came out and there's like, yeah, so for the rest of the year, we can't do these the seven, priorities that we had that were going for a merchant, and we're only focused on revenue making opportunities. And so the team is just like sad. They're like, oh, so we're turning it into an opportunity to like spend time and strategize and have more time to do the UX work and whatever. But it's like, anyway, the book is just timely because of like you meant, we all know different organizations, companies are cutting down, and this is a reminder to slow down and look at the small things and what we can do.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that, all leadership want to focus on one big thing, and everybody, should focus on that. We should invest on that. But we've seen so many examples of these, little wins, quick wins, right? And you just talked about that too, Christine. But my example is, so my team does strategic insights. We do the more complex deep dive analytics on experience programs. And we want to utilize our own tool that we give to our clients, but it has challenges. I mean, it's not yet there for the super extraordinary, analytic needs and stuff like that. So we give those inputs. And of course, organization has a priority to make the tool appropriate for certain, use cases first. So the response I got, I think one of you guys mentioned earlier, like, no, sorry, you didn't make the list with your requests and needs. But then somebody reached out and asked, so what are some small things that we can do that would at least make your life easier? And sure enough, my team was kind of, has been kind of down, like, oh, it doesn't do this, doesn't do that. The other day we saw a demo and some of these little things came up. Oh my gosh, you should have seen the excitement on all these people's faces. And now everybody's encouraged. They're like, oh yes, we're going to use the tool, and it's going to makes a huge difference when you have those small wins, while the whole organization either may not move for another 7 months, or they're focusing on one big thing. It won't take up too much time to do those little things.
I love that story. And one thing, I was in a workshop that's where somebody did this, and I have stolen it many times over. When you're brainstorming, you're doing some sort of planning, you split the room in half and you say to one side, I want you to come up with 5 ideas for how we could accomplish this goal with 0 budget. We can't spend any money. And the other side of the room, you say, sky's the limit. What would you do if money was no object? And it kind of forces people into the extremes. And I find actually usually that the people who are in the we can't spend any money group enjoy that process more, because it's like, all right, yes, and we have these constraints, but it's not about what we can't do, it's about what we could do. But I've had a lot of success with that in thinking about, how to restack resources or how to find smaller leverage points. That's an exercise that I've used pretty successfully before. And it's nice to dream. We all dream, what would we do if we won the lottery?
Talking about constraints, I think one of my favorite movie scenes is from Apollo 13 when they're trying to solve for, I think, CO2 levels, and Ed Harrison dumps out on the table just random objects that were on the spaceship of, all right, you have half an hour to figure out with these parts, how can we create a filter?
Yeah. We have to tap our inner MacGyver. And I'm hoping that everybody on this call is of a sufficient age that you get that reference. I just realized that depending on the audience, it might not be.
Unfortunately, unfortunately.
Yes. My fiance teaches college freshmen, and I'm like, God bless you. I couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. So, all right, we're just about at the top of the hour, so I am going to wrap things up. As usual, we will send out the summary from today. We will send out a link with the recording so that you can have access to that. And then don't we have a date for our next session in which we're targeting September, October. I'll have to go back and check on that. But we do have the book, which is called, I can never remember the full title. What Matters Next. Hang on. Oh, come on, Kate. Why don't you have your book?
While you're looking that up, I can tell you this is I'm super excited to read this book. So
I am too. I actually haven't read it yet.
yeah, I'm like really excited to read Reset.
Yeah.
Oh, the one that we,
Oh, the one we just did. Yeah.
I will tell you about.
Yeah, so beyond just sitting next to the couch, it's getting open tonight. Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah.
I had it on.
Very exciting.
I had it on Audible, and I didn't start it, and I didn't start it, and I didn't start it, and then like 3 weeks ago, I gotta get that book read, and then I finished it in like 2 days because it's
so good.
Yeah.
Well, I do know I have read their other books, and they, to Megan's point, they're just such great writers, and that's always fun, especially in the age of AI when there's so much just like generic writing. They're engaging, right? Truly engaging. So yeah, I know you guys were very, very motivating, and it's just such an intrinsically interesting topic that affects us all professionally and personally. Not like once in a while, but every minute of every day. Am I going to make a little difference? Am I going to pivot, or am I just going to pivot or glide? So so I got a lot out of being here, even though I didn't read it.
Well, and now you're inspired to read the book.
Yeah.
And when you're done with that one, so our next book is called What Matters Next, A Leader's Guide to Making Human-Friendly Tech Decisions in a World That's Moving Too Fast.
Great.
So it's written by a woman named Kate O'Neill, who I've known for, I don't know her well, but I've known her for a while. We spoke at some similar events. And the main thing that sticks out to me about her bio is she advises the United Nations on emerging technologies like AI.
Oh.
She goes by the tech humanist. And so she is, bye, Stephanie. She is an amazing thinker, and she very much has that a humanist approach to dealing with the richness, Jeff, of modern life and the richness of new technology. Not saying, oh my God, it's the end of the world, or, it's the silver bullet, but looking at it's a thing, it can help, but we have to be really thoughtful about how we weave this into humanity. So I picked this book because people had asked for a book on AI earlier this year. And I said, when somebody writes one I think is worth reading, I will be happy to pick it. And this is the first one I'd seen. So
super
I think you'll
timely.
like it. Yeah.
Especially with the human connection, because there's just too much just AI conversation out there that's dangerous.
Yeah. Apparently, OpenAI spends tens of millions of dollars processing please and thank you.
Yeah.
When people say please and thank you to ChatGPT. And there was an article that I read the other day about whether or not we need to do that. And Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, said, I think it's money well spent. Because if we drop those pleasantries with AI, we're training AI to talk like us.
Right.
And if suddenly we start dropping those with the AI, do we start dropping those with each other? And then everybody, sounds like a jerk. It never occurred to me that I inherently say please and thank you to, I use Claude, it never occurred to me that was silly. But yeah.
Well, you get better results. I think people started doing a lot of please and thank you because there was so much that emerged that you got better results when you were kind to AI. But now the big theme is that it's costing the environment because it's just that much more compute. But I like what I'm not always a fan of Sam Altman, sometimes not, but I kind of like what he's saying. Like, we don't want to get out of that habit of please and thank you.
Yeah, Martha, I'm going to send you a link to a podcast I listened to the other day with Reid Hoffman on Pioneers of AI. And it was all about breaking down the reality of the environmental impact of AI versus the sort of the narrative that's out there. Yes,
Well,
Deb,
could you send that to the group? Because I would be interested in
That
that
sounds really
too.
interesting.
Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. And I will set Deb, the next book name is What Matters Next by Kate O'Neill, O''Neall. All that will be in the email that you get with the recording and everything. So you'll have that. But as usual, thanks everybody for joining me on